Sky boards. This is going to be a full review of the Pyzel Ghost. I'll be talking about the different conditions I've ridden it in and how it goes in those conditions. And then towards the end I'll be a bit more specific about design features. Picture the scene! So I go to my local beach break, solid 18-second swell. I get there, 6 foot, 18 seconds roughly it was, predicted. I get there, it's definitely overhead. Ideal conditions to test the Ghost. This is all I had in the car anyway. So this is a low tide, really hollow A-frame beach break. So I start paddling out, really excited. As I'm paddling out, the swell starts to fill in more and more. It's getting bigger and bigger. It's getting to the point where it's reaching my limit, not really for size, but for how heavy it is. I'm starting to think, right, this is probably some of the heaviest waves I like to surf. A few people around me are getting waves, getting nailed, and not making the paddle out. There's one really good guy who's surfing right next to me. He was going on everything, but the same thing happened to him. He got completely nailed and didn't make the paddle out. So I'm being really selective now with what kind of waves I want to go for. So I will fill you in on exactly what happens on that session with this board as we get into the review. So I had a lot of questions about this board. A lot of people knew I had it, and people wanted to know what it went like. I did an initial review just showing my initial thoughts on the board. I'll stick that up there. But yeah, just to kind of summarise that, I had it out in pretty average conditions. It was at a sheltered spot, one of my local beaches. It's not a particularly good wave, so I got there. I only had this in the car, probably shoulder high when I got there. Didn't look particularly inspiring, to be honest, but I took this out anyway. It probably built head high, maybe just overhead on the sets, and I was really surprised with the board. I was really pleased with it. As I said in the video, one of my first waves was quite walled up, and I was really surprised at how fast the board is. If you look at the template, it's quite a pulled in tail, relatively less width on the nose as well. So it's not the kind of board you'd expect to be kind of speed generating board, but on that particular wave and similar waves I've had, when the waves is held up, it actually is surprising how good it is at generating speed. I thought it would need a wave with enough push to give it enough speed, but I'd say a really good kind of different range of waves this goes in. So I would say if you've got a shoulder high-ish wave with a bit of punch to it, this board will actually go in that, which I was surprised with. So that's one of the first things I really noticed about the board. Instantly as well, this was one of my first surfs on the board. I'd had a couple more. The amount of snap that you can generate from doing turns is unreal. It's such a fast board, especially considering it's 6'6" in length as well. So this is 6'6". This is a stock 6'6", so it's 20.5, 3 inches, 40.1 litres. And yeah, instantly I noticed, even on the smaller waves, it's so snappy. On the open face, you can really draw your turns back really quickly, a really short turning radius. Off the top as well, I was surprised at how quickly it comes off the top as well. So instantly, I was really stoked with the board, and I really wanted to get it out in some better waves. So I was waiting and waiting. I had a few more average surfs on the board, but I really wanted to get it out in some good waves before I did this review, and I was just I was really itching to really put it through its paces as well. There was a half decent day where I was surfing a local, it was kind of a point, it's a reef point kind of setup, so it's a really consistent wave and really good to kind of put a board through its paces and get a really good feel for the board. So that day wasn't really perfect by any means, but it was probably head high, maybe just approaching a bit overhead. Slight bit of chop on the face, but not too much. And like I say, it's a really kind of long, open-faced kind of point break wave. And yeah, so on that, one thing I did notice about the board is after a few waves on it, I noticed how unforgiving it can be. if you get to your feet and you're in slightly the wrong position, you're slightly off the deck grip perhaps, and this wave doesn't have that much power either, so you're not generating your own speed, but you have to do a lot of cutbacks and get back into the pocket of the wave quite a lot. And I noticed that if I was in slightly the wrong position on the board with my foot in, it pretty much messed the rest of the wave up for me. Once I got back into position, it was hard for me to start generating speed, whereas if I was up straight away in exactly the right place, I could that set the rest of the wave up. So I think potentially it is an unforgiving board. And as a comparison, I did another review on a Lost El Patron, which is another high performance shortboard. I'd say that is very slightly more forgiving than this. I'm not saying this is difficult to surf, but yeah, it just feels like if you're in the wrong place to start with, it's very unforgiving. Saying that, although it's quite unforgiving, I can't think of one time that I've bogged a rail on this board. This is one of the only boards I've surfed that I haven't bogged a rail yet. I haven't surfed it as much as my other boards yet. I've had it in quite a bit, but it's still relatively new. But I think on any other board that I've ridden, I would be bogging rails by now. So at this point, I was stoked with that surf, still waiting for some really solid waves. So I had the board out in pretty average waves, half decent, approaching head high. We're starting getting into the kind of depths of winter, so around, just approaching December now, so around November, December time, a couple of blobs appear on the charts. So one, as I said in the intro, was a local beach break. I was lucky enough to get a window at that break where I could get in, where it was at low tide. That's when it really peaks up into wave frames. Quite hollow, generally it's quite hollow. On this long period swell, as I said, I felt like I was approaching my limit, not for size, but just for how heavy the wave was. So I was paddling out, it was getting bigger and bigger. I got out, I got some really good waves on it, instantly felt great. One thing I did feel like when I was surfing this day to start with, so this is well overhead, not quite double overhead at this point, but my first few waves, I felt like I was slightly overpowering the board. Now I've dropped quite a lot of volume on this. I've dropped 3 litres compared to the El Patron, and I'm not sure if I was at that point still getting used to the drop in volume, because I thought as I was making the drop, making the bottom turn and kind of coming up the face, I felt like I was trying to manhandle the board too much, and it wasn't really a rail catch, but it just felt like I was it was almost a bit too snappy and a bit too responsive on the face, whereas I was a bit used to a bit more of a drawn out turn. So that was to start with. As I say, the swells kept building. I was being really selective with waves at that point. I was looking across at a couple of unridden ones that were coming through, and it looked like I could stand up in them like that. It was literally, it's usually an almond shaped barrel, this wave, but this was literally pretty cylindrical and just quite scary, to be honest. It's not the sort of waves I generally go out and choose to surf. I like it when it's bigger, but I like a big open face. I don't like a big heavy barreling thing that's potentially going to snap your board on every wave you take. So I was out there, I was being selective. I did get a few waves. I didn't get, loads of waves. I was being really selective, waiting for the right one that looked like it wasn't going to close out on me. First thing I noticed straight away on those waves was making the drop and the bottom turn just felt completely effortless. It just felt amazing. It just, generally, if I'd taken the bottom turn, either way, backhand, front hand on a really solid wave like that, I'm usually, in the back of my mind, I've got the transition from the drop to the bottom turn. I'm having to give it a lot of thought. With this, it just kind of happened instantly. I didn't have to give it any thought. The drop felt really comfortable. Making the bottom turn felt great, and I was straight kind of down the line instantly without thinking about it. I think part of that is the rocker, perhaps. I think this is slightly more rocker than I'm generally have surfed on a lot of the boards that I've reviewed recently. So I think the rocker helps it really fit into the wave, especially when it starts to get a bit more solid. Obviously, pulled in kind of rounded pin here really helps with that as well, gives loads of hold. And yeah, so that felt great. One other thing that I've noticed, I noticed that on a couple of other surfs previously as well, is it feels like the board generate speed in the turns, which I've never felt before really, to this level, where you're making a turn on the open face and it feels like you're almost building speed as you're making the turn, and that was extraordinary, and I never felt that before, and it felt great. So I was really pleased with that. So overall, on the more solid days, it's great. Following that session, that big day at the local beach, another blob appeared. This was a slightly bigger size swell, but not as long a period. So I think it was supposed to be, I don't know, 11, 12 foot swell. But I needed a bit of shelter. So I went across to another beach, which gets shelter. Pretty solid day again, definitely well overhead. Not quite touching double overhead, I'd say, but maybe getting there on the sets. And it's exactly the same experience again. Making the drop felt absolutely amazing. Just so much confidence. I'm usually not that good at late takeoff, so I just don't feel that confident making the late drops. But on this, I was just swinging on everything, no matter how late I was taking off underneath it, and it just felt great. It felt so good in those conditions. I feel like it will get to a point though, some people might use this or do use this as a proper step up for when it gets solid, and for me this is a good wave board, but for me as a proper step up to when it gets really solid, double overhead plus, I think it would just feel a bit too twitchy. I'm not sure, that probably is completely dependent upon your own preference and your experience riding kind of bigger waves, but for me I prefer in a step up to have a bit more hold, but have something that is making those big drawn out turns that you really do want to manhandle in a bigger wave, whereas this, like I say, would be twitchy a bit more. So that's my experience, the range of waves I've ridden, and I'll talk a bit about design features. So as soon as I picked it up under the arm, it felt tiny. It felt really small. So as I say, I've dropped about 3 litres. My Lost El Patron, which is the last performance shortboard I reviewed, was around 43 litres. This is 40.1, so I've dropped 3 litres, but even taking that into account, picking it up and holding it under the arm, it just felt so small. And I think that's one of the really clever things that Pyzel's done here. He's really hidden the volume well. As with a lot of the other boards that I ride, I like to have quite a pared down rail, and this feels like this. It doesn't feel particularly like a really sharp small rail that would kind of dig in, but it doesn't feel at all boxy in any way. So that's one key feature that I really did like. You could possibly see in the picture a lot of the volume has just gone under the chest, and then it kind of thins out a bit towards the nose, thins out quite a lot towards the tail. So most of the volume's here under the chest to get you kind of paddling into the wave. I didn't really have any issues with paddling this. Like I say, I've dropped a bit of volume. I'm now in a winter suit as well, but I haven't really struggled. But I don't really particularly struggle with paddling. I've never really had that much difficulty with it. So possibly if you're not as confident paddling or don't feel as fit paddling, I'd say possibly just go up a touch in volume, but for me it feels great. And yeah, so some of the characteristics I've talked about and feeling so snappy, you could put some of that down to the drop in volume, but I think a lot of it is to do with the design of the board as well. A couple of waves to start with before I got used to the board. I think I felt as though I was a bit above the wave. I'm not sure if that is to do with the concaves on the board. It feels like it's got a double going all the way through actually. I'm not going to go into all the details about design features, and you can log on to Pyzel's website and look specifically about all the bottom contours, but that feels like a double going right the way through to me, which is not what I'm used to. I usually have the your standard single to double, so I'm not sure if that made it feel slightly different. And like I say, I felt slightly more above the wave, which is hard to describe and kind of counterintuitive, thinking that it's quite a less volume board than I'm used to. But yeah, I got used to it really quickly, and yeah, I'm just absolutely blown away with it. Fin wise, briefly, whether it's a thruster, I've said in previous reviews, I always, for a performance kind of shortboard, I'm always going to ride a thruster for more control. You might, if you were riding hollower waves, and this was your kind of travel barrel board, you might want a quad for more hold in the barrel. For me, I'm not generally getting barreled that much. Like that day I referred to earlier, that was approaching my limit really, double overhead pitching barrels like that. You know, I pull into a couple, don't really make it out of many, and so it's more for me as of an open face kind of board for good days. So yeah, just to summarise, absolutely blown away by it.